Hey folks, welcome to another edition of My Car Guru. Today we are taking a stroll back into the history books. Not of me or my family or all that nonsense. This is actually about the automobile industry. And I think it's worth considering some of these things. And so let's go way back to when the vehicle was invented, or the car, the motor car. You know, all up to that point, it was all about horses and wagons, right? And so a lot of the early car builders were previously coach builders, wagon builders. I mean, they already had the infrastructure to be able to build a horse and buggy, or not, not the horse, but the buggy. And so they started making cars. The earliest self-propelled vehicle was actually steam-powered, and it was built by a guy named Nicholas Joseph Cugnot way back in the 18th century. 1769 was when he did that. But the first gasoline-powered automobile, it was not Henry Ford, folks. We're going to talk about Henry and the Ford Motor Company a little bit here, but I won't dwell on it too much, but it's worth talking about. The first gasoline-powered automobile was the Benz patent Motorwagen, and it was patented by a guy named Carl Benz in 1886. Where have you heard the name Benz before? B-E-N-Z. That's right, Mercedes-Benz. But you know, that wasn't the name of the company that built the Mercedes. No, it was called Daimler-Benz. It was actually called Daimler-Benz from 1926 to 1998 when they goofed up and merged with the Chrysler Corporation. Remember that? 1998 through 2007, they merged to form Daimler Chrysler. And then they kicked Chrysler out, and they formed Daimler AG. And then they changed their name again for the last time to Mercedes-Benz Group, and that's what they're still called today. So this is what we're going to do. We're just kind of jump around a little bit with some trivia, some history, but I think it'll be fun. Like this. Did you know that most horns are in the key of F? I bet you don't know why. I didn't either. But it's a fact. The key of F, apparently, falls in the middle of the human hearing range, which is somewhere between 350 and 370 hertz. So it's about the way the sound vibrates in your ear. It's piercing enough to cut through traffic noise without being painfully shrill. So most cars actually use two horns, one the low tone and the high tone, usually F and A or A flat. So that gives you something to hum along with when you're going down the road. Just honk your horn and you'll know you'll be on key, that is, in the key of F. It's also a compromise that happened. It was an engineering compromise. This is crazy. It provides the best volume, clarity, and durability for typical 12-volt electrical horns. So there you go. It's actually something that you've been thinking about. I just can sense it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the history of the automobile. The Duryea, you ever heard of that? That was the first American-made gasoline car. And it came 7 years after Carl Benz got his patent. It was introduced in 1893. It looked like a little wagon without like a horse-drawn buggy without the horses and all the harnesses and all that stuff. It had a little tiller that they used for the steering wheel. And no, the Model T was not the first vehicle. If you ask the average person on the street, what was the first car that was sold in the United States, they're going to say the Model T. But it didn't come along until 1908. Well, Lenny, why did they call it the Model T? Why didn't they call it the Model A? Well, because T is the 20th letter in the alphabet. And so the Model T was the 20th version of the vehicles that Henry Ford made. The very first car that he made was the Model A. Made and sold, I should say. Didn't sell many of them. So there was a B, a C, a D, an E, and so forth until you got to T. T was the first one that was actually mass-produced and made affordable. Because there were cars that came before the Model T that were just simply out of reach for normal, everyday Americans. They were only for the rich folks. And, of course, there weren't any really paved roads, maybe in major cities. Everybody was still, riding around on horses and buggies and so forth. There were no stop signs. There were no traffic lights. There were no parking places. Just think about that. I mean, how the automobile changed the world. I mean, it's just unbelievable how many industries were affected by the automobile. Just think, when the Model T came out, there was no such thing as a motel. There were hotels in cities and towns, but they didn't have parking lots. They had places to tie up your horses. But people didn't travel back then like they do now because they couldn't. I mean, a long journey was 100 miles, but the vast majority of Americans never traveled more than 30 miles from their home, ever. But the automobile made that a possibility. So let's see, you'll understand about Henry and what happened. They did come out finally with another car. They went from the T back to the A. Why'd they do that, Lenny? Well, because Henry wanted to start fresh, because the Model A Ford, I have one out in my showroom right now. Mine's a 1930 model, but in 1927, they went from the Model T to the Model A. And the Model A was a dramatic improvement as far as drivability. It had better steering, better brakes. It had better cooling system. The engine was more powerful. Still not real powerful at 45 horsepower, but it was more powerful than a Model T. And it was a big departure from what they had been doing since 1908. So that's why it's called the Model A. And from then, they just went in all different directions. I have a 1934 Model 40. So that was another generation of vehicles that they had developed that started off with trucks and truck chassis, and they used it in early cars. Okay, well, we'll just keep rolling right after this short break. Just think of all the things you've learned already this morning. Why the Model T was called the Model T and the Model A and so forth, and why we never had any Holiday Inns until the car came out. Also, fast food, just everything. I mean, there is no industry that was not impacted by the auto industry. I mean, it enabled people to live in the country and work in the city. That's one. It connected people that otherwise would never have the opportunity to rub shoulders with one another. But because they were now mobile and they were starting to build roads, then it made it possible to travel around this country without taking a train, because that was the only way that you were going to get around long distance was on a train, because automobile transportation just wasn't feasible because of the poor roads. Plus, there was no place to buy gas. I mean, gasoline supply was very hit or miss, as you can imagine. I've got a couple of the old visible gas pumps out in my showroom just as a display. And you look at those and you think about how simple and crude they are. They were modern. I mean, that was a modern solution for people to be able to somehow monitor the quality of the fuel that they were getting. Because before this, they would just take fuel and get it any way they could out of a huge tank and into the car, and had no idea, really, the quality of the fuel that they were getting. The visible gas pumps made it possible to see it, because you had this pump. The attendant would pump it and fill up the tank at the very top, which is in clear glass, and then if they wanted 3 gallons or 5 gallons, they just dropped the level down until it got to that mark, but they could see the quality of the fuel. So there were no gas stations, no truck stops, in addition to no hotels and no Howard Johnson's. Did you ever stop at Howard Johnson's? I used to love those places. I mean, they called their hot dogs Frankfurters. I always thought that was cool. And plus, they sold some pretty cool little model trucks, which I still have several of them, that we would buy when we went to Howard Johnson. My parents always wanted the clams, the fried clams. and I would always get a couple Frankfurters, and the French fries were good too. That's a good memory. But there would have been none of those had it not been for the automobile. Okay, let's segue a little bit. Do you know that the modern car has about 30,000 different parts in it? Now, when you think about that, and you're buying a service contract or an extended warranty, and you're wondering, well, should I spend that extra money to do that? 30,000 parts. They show you a warranty, and they tell you it covers all these components. Well, when there's 30,000 of them, I'm sure they're not all listed on the page. So that's why when you buy a service contract / extended warranty, you want to buy one of those exclusionary policies. It says everything's covered except these things. That way you know that everything else is covered, and it would probably cover it won't cover all of those 30,000 parts, because none of those service contracts / warranties cover any kind of trim, like the leather on the seats, moldings, plastic, glass, body panels, bumpers. They call them bumper-to-bumper warranties, but they don't cover the bumpers. I've always thought that was a little strange. Okay, first speeding ticket. You believe that somebody actually got a speeding ticket in 1902? That must have been a really slow speed limit. I live in Greenville, Tennessee, and right beside Greenville there's a metropolis called Tusculum, Tennessee. And I have to drive through Tusculum to head northeast, like if I'm going up towards Johnson City and so forth. Well, there's this little section through Tusculum where they have put up speed cameras. And I get it, they're trying to raise revenue. That's probably more of a motive than keeping the speed down. You know what the speed limit is? 25. I can't even coast at 25. I could ride my bicycle at 25. I mean, I'd be moving pretty good, but still. So they put speed cameras up. Already, my wife has received 2 speeding tickets, one for going 37, and the other was, I think, just over 30. So if you come to Tusculum and you get near my barber shop, you'll see a barber pole on the left, and that's where my 93-year-old barber is. Just slow down, because if you don't, you'll get a speeding ticket. Guaranteed. Okay, let's see what else is interesting here. Oh, you know what the number 1 selling car of all time is? Well, it used to be the Model T Ford, and then it was supplanted by the Volkswagen Beetle. Well, over time, the Beetle's gone, Model T's gone, but there's this little car built by Toyota that is the best-selling car of all time. What's it called? No, it's not the Camry. It's the Corolla. It's been around a long time. The last car to offer a cassette tape player. Now, that's been a while since I've used a cassette. Do you still have any cassettes? I have a bunch of them. I have a bunch of 8-tracks. I mean, I remember going on dates with my wife. This is like 1973. And we'd cruise around, and I had this case that I carried all my cassette tapes. I had American Pie by Don McLean. Let's see. What else did I have? Did I have no. James Taylor. I had several of his 8-tracks. Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, America. I think I had America at that point. But then we went to the cassettes, and that lasted a long time. That was a great relief because, you didn't have to carry a suitcase around with you to carry your 8-tracks. And plus the 8-tracks, you remember how they used to bleed? Like you'd be playing one song and you'd hear another song in the background. And, when that started happening, you knew that the heads on your 8-track player needed to be cleaned, or your tape was getting too stretched out, I guess. I don't know. And then the CD came along. But yeah, the last tape player was in a Ford Crown Victoria in 2011. And it's kind of hard to believe that we were still selling a Ford Crown Victoria in 2011. But yeah, that was it. That was the last one. And it lasted too long. It wasn't long after that they eliminated the Crown Victoria. And we were a Ford, let's see, in 2000, yeah, we were a Ford, Lincoln, and Mercury dealer. And we had the Crown Vic, the Mercury Marquis, and the Lincoln Town Car. And they are all gone bye-bye now, along with Mercury. And we said bye-bye to Lincoln. We were after it was all said and done, we were a Ford Lincoln dealer. And then we just could not give those things away, those Lincolns. They just weren't very popular. If we could, we were selling 40, 45 Fords a month and 2 Lincolns. And they wanted us to build a new showroom just for Lincoln. And we said, no, thank you. And so they said, well, we'll pay you, we'll buy you out of the Lincoln franchise. We don't want you as a Lincoln dealer now. I said, okay. And they made me an offer, and I said, sold. Okay, so here's one. Do you know that if you hold a remote car key to your head, you can actually double its range? Why? Because your skull acts as an amplifier. I know. I don't know whether I'm going to have to ask ChatGPT if that's true. This came from Google. It doesn't sound true, but then I'm not a scientist, so I'm not sure. You might want to check that one out. Don't take that one to the bank, okay? And speaking of banks, I tell you what, that whole relationship has changed. When I first got into the car business, dealers did not finance cars very often. This was back in the late 70s. People went to their bank, and really the only people that could go to a credit union were people that worked for a particular industry that had a credit union. But yeah, you wanted to buy a car, you would go down to see the banker, say, hey, I want to buy a car, and he would pull up your credit file and see how much money you had in the bank. Said, okay, well, you can spend this much. So you go car shopping, and you find a car, and then you call the banker and say, I need a check for this, and he writes a check, you take it to the dealer, and then drive your new car home. It's not that way anymore. Very few people do that. If you're a cash buyer, you just write a check out of your bank account. But the average person comes to a car dealership, fills out a credit application. It's submitted to the bunch of different financial institutions. Could be credit unions and banks, or it could be a captive finance entity like Ford Motor Credit or Toyota Motor Credit. Used to be GMAC, So it made it convenient for customers because they didn't have to go back and forth to the bank. Now, in mid-70s, I guess, we would take a credit application from somebody. I'd pick up the phone. I'd call Norma down at Greene County Bank, and I'd read it to her, and she'd write it all down. And then she'd hand it to Hoot. His name was Hoot Gibson, and Hoot would look at it, and then he would call me back if he didn't want to buy the contract, and Norma would call me back if they did. Well, I pick up the phone, it's Hoot. And I said, oh, shoot, what's wrong? He said, he won't pay anybody. I remember he called me back one time and said, Lenny? No, he didn't call me Lenny. Lawson? That guy won't pay anybody. Well, I figured that. But he'll pay me. Fix him up. And so we would fix up the contract, and customer would sign it, give us their down payment. We'd put them riding in the car. Then we would hand carry the contract over to the bank, hand them the signed contract, and they'd hand us a check. That's how we did financing in the early days. Now, it's all electronic. Many times, a computer makes the decision. We'll call in a credit app. Well, I say call in. We'll punch in a credit application into the system, and within seconds, we get an X or a check mark, green check mark. And if there's any kind of problem with their credit, maybe the bank will do it, but they want more money down, or they want some more information. They need to know exactly what the customer makes per month because they don't believe what's written on the credit app. They want to see a payroll check. this happens, especially with people with marginal credit, and the computer kicks it out, but it goes to an individual that works at the bank or the credit union, and then they call the dealership and say, okay, we want to see some proof of income. Now, this happens that there's a lot of shenanigans that go on in the financing world, and most of it is on the part of dealers who are lying on people's credit applications by not disclosing the proper income. If you ever are financing a car, make sure you review the credit application before the salesperson takes running off with it and disappears and gives it to a manager. Because if you look at that credit application and they didn't put down what your income is, they plan on giving you a raise. And I'll explain that here in just a minute. Okay, so you've applied for credit at a car dealership. You're trying to buy a car, and the salesperson turns the credit app around to you for you to sign, and you're looking at it, and you see where it says gross income, and it's blank. And you say, I told you what my income was. Yeah, but we always leave that blank. No, they don't. What they're going to do is they're going to write in a number. They're going to look at your debt and see where it falls as far as the bank's requirements for the debt-to-income ratio. And if you gave them a number of $2,000 a month in gross income, and in order to get you approved for that loan, it needs to be $3,500 per month, they're going to give you a raise. And if they do, they have committed bank fraud. And you signed the application, so you're also a party to that fraud. But don't panic too much, because the dealers are usually the one that get in trouble for doing that. And because what happens is if the bank suspects anything, they'll call you and say, oh, yeah, you bought a car from us or financed a car from us. You bought it from ABC Motors and just wanted to verify your income. They said that you made $3,500 a month. Oh, no, I didn't. I don't make $3,500. I make $2,000 a month. Oh, okay. And then they'll call the dealership the next morning or that day and say, you need to get that car back. We're not financing that car. You lied to us. But in the past, there have been some financial institutions that have been in cahoots with dishonest dealers just to increase their loan portfolios. It is something to watch out for because, well, number one, maybe you really can't afford that car and shouldn't be buying it anyway if you only make $2,000 a month. And they've probably jacked around with the monthly payments as well by using some type of Foursquare negotiation technique, and you have no idea what you really paid for the car. So I hate to end on a negative note like that. We were having so much fun with the history and all that, but sometimes you just have to provide a warning that needs to be provided. Well, thanks for listening to this edition of My Car Guru. If you have any questions, call me or send me a text to 423-552-2020, and I'll see you next time.